Welcome back to the TimCo Retail Manager series. In 2019, we wrapped up phase 1 of the project, which included building an API with authentication and a WPF application for the front end. We wrapped up the phase by upgrading our application to .NET Core. Now, we're moving into phase 2. In this video, we'll do a review of where we're at, including a bit of cleanup work that needs to be done to fix a bug and remove some unnecessary commented out code. Then, we'll look ahead at what we hope to accomplish in Phase 2 and what technologies will be involved. Now, Patreon members, don't forget to head over to Patreon to get the source code for today's video. If you aren't a Patreon member and are interested in getting the source code for each TimCo Retail Manager video, head over and sign up at the $5 per month level or higher. Now, if you're not familiar with this project, let me explain about it a bit. We created the TimCo Retail Manager application to be a simulation of the real world. We started with .NET Framework and upgraded to .NET Core in order to gain that experience in doing an upgrade like that. You see, I'm a firm believer in experience. Seeing someone do something is not the same thing as doing it yourself. So I've always encouraged people to follow along with me so they can get the experience of doing the work. Then you can do something similar on your own to ensure you grasp the concept and that what you've learned has really sunk in. This is how you grow as a C# developer. Now, if you want to catch up to where we're at now, I have bundled all the videos and source code into the course on my site. Since we're kicking off Phase 2, I put the Phase 1 course on sale for a limited time. Use the link in the description to get that discount. Okay, let's move over to Visual Studio. So here is our project as it stands right now. We've grouped it into 3 different folders. Now these folders have no bearing on the project themselves. These are just visual groupings for us. We have the API section, the database, and the WPF application. The database folder is where we have our TRM data SQL Server database design. And this is one of our databases we use. We have 2 databases. One is built using the SQL Server Data Tools project, this right here. And what this does is it builds for us a number of tables that support our sales, products, and inventory for our application. We also have an entity framework database, which is where our login information is. We did want to keep that separate because we want to have a separation of concerns so that someone who has access to the TRM database doesn't necessarily have to have access to the login information where they could make some significant changes. Typically, a login database is much more secured than even your data, or is differently secured, let's put it that way. Okay, so that's what the separation is there. Now, the next thing we have is the API. And the API sits in the middle. And this is where we've designed it this way so that we can put all of our data access and business logic behind this API layer. That way, the user interface can change without having to change the majority of our application. So this is our API. And the first thing you notice here is we actually have one unloaded project. This project is the old API. If you remember, and if you went through the process with us, we had to basically create a new API and bring our code into it rather than doing an in-place upgrade. And that's just the way that it works with web applications with upgrading to .NET Core. Now that we've got this API in working, the new one, we can go ahead and remove this old project. So remove it entirely from our source code. All right, and that will make a change. There's that one change now in the application, but it's not actually entirely gone. If we go and look at the File Explorer for this, you'll note that there still is the old folder, and that's this TRM Data Manager. All right, so we're going to get rid of that folder entirely. So I just deleted it, and now if we go back to Team Explorer, we'll notice a lot more has been deleted. So that's a key note here, is that just because you remove something from your solution doesn't mean it removes it from the disk. So I had to manually go to the disk and remove that as well. That will then push up through source code and remove it from all of my source code. So I don't have extra stuff up there that's just kind of taking up space. All right, so now we have back to just our API and our library for our API. And our API is .NET Core 3.0 or 3.1, okay? And our library is going to be .NET Standard 2.0. All right, now 2.1 is out, but that does give us less backward compatibility with other libraries. And I don't think we need to go to .NET Standard 2.1 at this point. We may in the future. For our front end, we only have one right now, and that's the WPF application, which has two projects. We have the library, which is going to be a .NET Standard 2.0 project, and we have the desktop UI, which is a WPF project and is .NET Core 3.0. All right, so there's what we have as far as our project. Now let's talk through one bug we have. Let's demonstrate this bug. So I'm going to start this up just so we can see what's going on here and see, kind of what some of you have experienced. I had heard from a number of you that there was an issue here. So I got the login form. If I log in, and it should log in. Give it a minute for it to start up. There we go. I'm going to put a couple things in the cart. Okay? And I'm not going to check out. I'm going to hit account log out. Now I'm logged out. Everything should be gone about my interaction with the cart, everything. I hit log in, and my cart is full still. That's a bug. So let's find out why this bug exists. So let's close out of this. We'll close out of everything, stop the solution from running. And let's look at what happens on the log off. So if we go to let's go to shell view model first. And the shell view model has a few events. One of them is logged in. And then we have log out. What happens at log out? Well, we have the reset user model. So that clears out our user information. We have the API helper log off, which what that does is it clears out the headers. All right. And then we have the activate the login view, and we have a new cancellation token. Okay. So that's what we're doing on the logout. Notice that we also have this handle event that's commented out. We have HandleAsync. This is code we no longer need. So let's clean up that as well. Okay. So on HandleAsync, we're going to load the sales view model. So this HandleAsync happens when we're handling a event. What event is that? Well, if we look up at the top here, we'll see that we are iHandle right here. This is our event aggregator, and it's saying handle a logon event. And so right down here, we have HandleAsync for the logon event. So that's handling whenever a person logs in. And what do? We activate an item. We activate the sales view model. Now, does anybody see the bug in this situation? Well, if you notice up here where we are getting the login view, we say ioc.get login view model. But when we go to activate the item for the sales view model, we use a variable. Well, where does that variable come from? Well, up here, we bring in, let's make this a little nicer. So let's quick action refactor to wrap the parameter list. Wrap every parameter is actually what I want, like so. There we go. And it's offering to give me additional recommendations. I'm going to close that out for now. I don't need that. But in here, we've got the I logged in user model. We have the event aggregator. Then we have sales view model. And we're asking for the sales view model. We're capturing that, and we're storing that. And then whenever we whenever the login event fires, we use this sales view model. Well, what problem do you see here? Well, we're not getting a new sales view model every time a person logs in. We're using the same one over. That means we either have to clear out that sales view model and reset it every time, or, and this is the better option, what we need to do is use the same pattern where we ask the dependency injection system to give us a new instance every time a person logs in. So let's do that. I'm going to copy that code up here, and I come down here. Instead of sales view model, I'm going to say ioc.get sales view model instead, which means that I don't need to ask for this sales view model. I don't need to ask or store that sales view model. I don't need to capture it there either. I need to make sure I have my commas though. All right, so that should be a fix. Let's go ahead and run this code and make sure it still runs. We haven't put an issue in the code somewhere. So we got our login form that just popped up, and I hit login. Let's add a couple of items to the cart. I'm going to say log out. I'm going to log in again. The cart is empty. So we had a mistake in our code, or a bug in our code, that was hard to find because of the fact that we were used to logging in and doing our work and then logging off. We hadn't tested the idea of log in, do work, log out, log back in, and check to see if the work has been cleared out. And that's, when I talk about the happy path, we had been using the happy path. And the happy path is if the users do what you expect them to do, the way they expect you to do it, or the way you expect them to do it, that's the happy path. So the idea is you log in correctly, you don't use bad credentials, you go right to the sales page, you do some work in the sales page, and then you check out, you log out, and you close the application. That's kind of the happy path, the path that you're most expecting users to do. But users always deviate from that path in some way. And so by testing these odd cases where you assume, well, if you log out, all that's gone. That's the assumption. But evidently it wasn't true. And so now it is true because we've tested it. We found there is a problem, and we have resolved it by changing how we get that one variable, the sales view model. So as a matter of, we were doing it improperly. We were doing it expecting it to only be used once, and in fact, it was used multiple times if a user logs off and logs back in. All right, let's stop this. And while we're in here, let's go through these others and make sure that we don't have any commented out major sections of code. We do have a to-do in there. We actually have a few to-dos in here, but that's okay. None of them are life-threatening to our application. I just make sure that we don't have any more of the problems like we had where we had, that handle code. We now have a HandleAsync, and async is a little bit different. And so we had kept the code in there. We hadn't deleted it when we needed to. So that's the only one I found. So we cleaned that out. So I think we're good there. Okay, so we fixed the bug, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually kind of commit this to our source control. So fix code bugs. And let's just say remove unneeded code and fixed the log off cart issue. All right, I'm going to commit that. Just commit. I'm not going to push it yet or sync it. And I go back to my Solution Explorer. Now everything's checked in. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new item at the solution level. So let's close out everything. And then at the solution level, I'm going to say add, I'm going to say not new project, new item. And it gives me a list of items that a solution can have I'm just going to have a text file. We're going to call this let's call it roadmap. All right. And we're going to say inside here, notice it's create a folder called solution items. And inside here, we're going to say phase 2 roadmap. And we're going to say application ideas. All right. So it's going to be application ideas, and we'll move certain things down to the phase 2 roadmap and kind of put a little bit of an order to them. We'll see as we move forward, it may be we have to move things in and out of the phase depending on if we have extra time or if we start getting crunched for time. More likely we'll start getting crunched for time because we're going to assume we can do things pretty quickly, and that assumption's usually wrong because we usually come into bugs or other issues you have to kind of clean up. That's pretty common for software development. So when it comes to estimating your project, estimates are based a lot on guesses. Now, the more you do software development and the more you've done this exact thing that you're going to do, the easier it is to have better estimates because of the fact that you say, okay, I've done this before. Last 3 times I did it, it took me about a week to do. And so therefore, I can assume it should take about a week to do. But there still is that unknown factor of this particular application. Maybe it's a little bit different than you've done before. Maybe that makes it faster, or more likely, it causes more problems, which makes it go slower. So just know that project estimation in a macro level is really hard and is pretty much just guesswork. It takes a lot of effort to try and get anything closer than that. And honestly, most of the time, it's not worth that effort. So just a little aside there. What we're going to do right now is we're going to put some ideas on paper, essentially. And we're going to say, okay, these are the ideas we think we want to do in the upcoming months as we work on the TimCo Retail Manager. Now, this application is a little interesting in the fact that it's a testbed application. This is designed to be an application to teach you how to do things in the real world. That's different than the desired outcome of most applications, which is to do a task. So there is a little bit of manipulation going on here in the fact that our reasoning for things might be a little bit different than what you would do because maybe there's an easier way of doing things or a more common way of doing things. We won't do anything wrong. We just may add more cutting edge things or add more additional things that might not necessarily have to go into the application, but give you a broader perspective on how to put these particular technologies into production. Okay? So with that, let's talk through the ideas. I do want to hear from you though. So in the comments down below, if I don't mention something that you kind of want in the application, let me know. Now, some things, if it's not necessarily going to add a whole lot of value as far as teaching goes, we might not add it even if it makes sense from an application perspective. Again, this is a teaching application. So it's kind of bare bones in some ways. If it's a real application, first of all, we would have spent a whole lot more time in it. Even though we spent a whole year on this project, we've done so over the course of about 35 videos. This is the 36th video, which means that we've only spent about a week's worth of time in this. That's not a lot of time. So that's why we only have 2 forms in our WPF application. Why we only have a few endpoints in our API. So it may be that an application that actually works would have 18 or 20 screens and they do all these different things, but maybe they're so similar that we've decided not to put them into the application right now. Okay? So just note that if your particular thing you want to see doesn't get into the TimCo Retail Manager, that may be why. Because it may be a repetition of, okay, build the same type of screen over again, but with just different features. That might not be as valuable to you as you're learning. So for application ideas, the first thing I see is that this application needs to actually interact with the inventory. That's one of those things we've kind of glossed over and kind of made work, but it's not really working. And that's what we need to fix. We need to get the inventory actually working. So stuff coming in, stuff going out, we'll need to make that actually work. That's one of the functional things we have to do with this application. Now, with this, we need to move the API to Azure. Now, I have gotten the question, well, what if I don't want to spend the money on Azure? Well, first of all, we're going to move the API to a free tier of Azure. However, the SQL Server will not be a free tier. It'll be $5 per month. So there is a cost to this. You don't have to do the actual move, though. This is just a deployment scenario. You don't have to move it to Azure if you don't want, but by watching how we do the deployment, you can deploy to your own servers if you want. All right. So with this, if you're going to move something to the Azure or to anywhere else, if you're actually deploying it, you really need to have a CICD process. Now, CICD stands for continuous integration and continuous deployment. The two things are close, but they're not the same thing. So continuous integration talks to the idea that whenever I check in code, it gets built and tested and make sure that the build actually works and doesn't have a problem. And if you have unit tests, which we don't have yet, but if you have unit tests, they're all passing. So that's kind of important to have in place, because then the second part of that, continuous deployment, talks about whenever you check in code, it's going to get deployed somewhere so you can test that deployment. Now, we're not going to have a multi-server scenario where we have our dev server, our test server, and our pre-production, and our production server. We'll probably just have maybe even just a dev server, not even a production server, because this is more about teaching the development process. Going on to the testing and the pre-production and all the rest with databases and all that, I've got a course on that, application design, or application lifecycle design. That's what it is. So if you check that out, that course is designed to walk you through that process with multiple different scenarios with dev and staging and production and the deployment between all of them and how that all works. But this is more just a matter of getting something in place to be continuously integrating and deploying our code. All right. Now, with that, we also have the idea we have a desktop app. So we're going to deploy the desktop app to Blob Storage for download. So we're going to have some place, I'm not even sure yet, we'll probably have a Razor page somewhere, maybe even attached to our API, that has a download link for our application. So we do a build, and let's just say it's version 1.0.3, and that builds the exe for our WPF application. It compiles it. It's going to upload that compiled exe to Blob Storage, where it's going to have now a new link in a web page somewhere that says, okay, you can download the latest version, and now that latest version will be 1.0.3. So we'll set that up as well. Now, getting back to the inventory side of things, we do need to introduce a web-based inventory control system. And that may be Blazor. That might be an option for us. All right. We also need to have web-based reporting. And then one more thing that's been on my radar that we haven't gotten to yet that we need to get to, I think this year is the year to get to it, and that is a Xamarin Forms app for a mobile register. So the idea is that the clerk can go right to, they can be mobile, they don't have to be at a counter, they can go whether it be at a remote location or it's just in the aisle somewhere. They can check a person out right from where they're at on their mobile device using a Android or iOS application. So we'll set that up as well. So those are the things, the big topics I want to tackle in this for this application. I think that of these, I think all of them go on the phase 2 roadmap. Where they go is going to be a bit of a question mark. Okay, so I think what we're going to do is we'll set up, video 1 or the next step 1. There's maybe a couple of videos for each of these topics. But for this first one, I think the first thing you need to do before we do anything else is take advantage of .NET Core. We haven't done that yet. So we moved over to .NET Core, but we never really made use of it. For example, in the API, I don't think we're even using dependency injection for our controllers. So let's look at the inventory controller. I believe in here, yep, new inventory data. So we're going to transition over to having the dependency injection. We're also going to be using logging so we know what's going on in our application. And since we're going to go to Azure, we'll even implement application insights so that we can monitor our application using that tool and have a better picture of what's going on inside of our application even after it's deployed into production. So then that's the first step on our roadmap for phase 2. After that, we probably should work on the CI/CD process. Before we even move the API to Azure, we should get CI/CD set up. And we'll do that with Azure DevOps. And we'll talk through the option of keeping our source code in GitHub, or if we move it over to Azure DevOps and have Azure DevOps control everything. That's not a hard process to do. So if you have your source code in one platform and you decide to start using the other platform's tooling, you can move it over very easily with Git. And that might be something we talk through. And so we'll put that on as a possibility because I think that would be a good learning experience. What do you do when you have Git, but you're on a different, maybe you're on Bitbucket, or maybe you're in GitHub, but you want to move it over to somewhere else like Azure DevOps. Now, with that being said, we don't have to move it. Azure DevOps works just fine with any Git host. So if you have source code in Git, Azure DevOps can use it for building and releasing your code without having to have it moved anywhere. So you don't have to move it, but it might be a good learning tool to move it. So we'll talk that one through. All right. After we get the CI/CD process set up, then I think that we should move the API to Azure. So we'll talk through what does that entail, what's going on, how it connection strings, what happens there, all those good questions. And also with that, we should probably talk about move the databases to Azure SQL. And so that will be a process as well. That'll be part of probably a CD process. So you might do CI over here. We're actually doing a build of this, and then we'll do these, and then we'll wire up the continuous deployment where we actually deploy to these locations. So maybe a few videos worth of content there, but we'll make sure we get that in a good sequence so that you're confident in how to take your source code and do something with it. How you deploy it. How do you actually get it out into the world, into the real world, and actually start making use of it, even when you have a desktop application. And that's kind of an important thing, is that we have a desktop application. It's not just a web-based application. So what do we do there? And so we'll talk that through. So with that, I think that deploy the desktop app to Blob Storage. And that's Azure Blob Storage, by the way. And a blob just means that it's a file system. You're just putting your file somewhere. And so there's a container that stores data, and we'll create a container for that. And it's super cheap, practically free. So I think at this point, we'll have our CI/CD process done, and we'll have our application pretty much set up where we've got our existing application, but it's being pushed to the cloud, it's being built, it's downloadable, and we can start working with it as it is. Once that happens, we can start adding new features to our application. I think the first thing we need to do is look at the web-based inventory system, inventory control system. And that's where we might do Blazor. I think that's probably a good option because it allows for us to do some fun stuff with client-side or seemingly client-side work, even though we'll probably use Blazor server-side for this part because Blazor server-side's actually been released into production. Blazor client-side has not been released to production, and so we're not going to use that yet because it's not ready for prime time yet. There's still a lot of changes going on in that system. I don't want to bring in something that's not production ready because this is about developing a real-world application, and real-world applications need to use production-ready code. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Now, I know we haven't covered everything we want to do in our application idea list, but I think that this is a good chunk to work on. Now, we're not doing a truly agile process, although we're pretty agile in how we're doing things. What we're doing instead is we're taking a little chunk of work and we're doing it and then making sure it works and moving on. So it's kind of an agile process, but it's not a formal agile process. It's a little different when you're doing things on video and releasing videos every other week. So it's a little bit different than an actual business environment. But this right here is a pretty good chunk of work that's pretty much, it's very, very similar. It's all kind of around the same idea of deployment, except for this last piece, which is kind of the next step in phase 2. So I think with that, we'll leave it there. We'll see how things shake out. We'll see if anything comes up during this process where we go, you know what, that's more important to get up and running now. Or, you know what, make him put off even this and we'll move over and do something else instead. So I don't want to go playing too far in the future and lock ourselves into something that might not be ideal. Now, I think one thing that we're missing here that they were trying to accomplish with this, and I think we can do it better. I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to renumber all of these. It's kind of a pain, but that's okay. Is I'm going to say that we're going to set up a simple task board in Azure DevOps. So what we'll do, let me renumber these while I'm talking here. What we'll do is we'll go into Azure DevOps, and before we even set up CICD, we're going to set up a task board, a really simple one, where we're not going to worry about the agile methodology or we're just going to have tasks and bugs, essentially. And we'll set that up and start using it in just a very basic manner. So we can put these tasks in there. We can see our roadmap of what's coming up. We can add other things in there like bugs. So when you find a bug like we just fixed a little bit ago, I can add that to the bug list. And then we can address it, we can put it into one of our videos. We can attach it to the commit and say, okay, we fixed the bug in this commit. We can see that process work all the way through to the deployment once we go to the next video and set up CICD. So I think we're going to set this up here. Okay, so with that being saved, I think that's all we're going to do for today's lesson. Here is your assignment. You've got 2 assignments here. First of all, I would like to hear your ideas on phase 2. Should we move these numbers around? Should we add something before or after one of these numbers? And mention the number by name. Or so say, you know what, I think that after number 5, we should do number 2 instead. And kind of flip those around. Or you say, you know what, after number 5, I think we should add a Xamarin form app instead. So that way we know kind of where you're talking about in this relationship. Or the other thing you can do is say, you know what, to the application ideas list, I would like to add a NuGet server. We need to have, create private NuGet packages and have that as part of our application or something else. So that's part 1. That's the first thing I would like you to do. Leave those notes down in the comments. I'll try to get them added to this list if I think that that's a good idea, a good direction for the application to go. But the second thing I want you to do is I want you to, if you have a source code, and if you are a Patreon member at the $5 per month level or higher, you should have a source code. Get the source code and try it out. Make sure you try those edge cases, those things that aren't on that happy path, and see if there's any other bugs you come across. If there is, leave that down in the comments as well. Please make sure you have a clear reproduction steps. Okay, so don't just say there's a bug in the login process. That really doesn't help me. I don't know how to diagnose that and how to reproduce that. So say when you log in with the normal credentials, tim@imtimcorey.com, and then you log off and then you log back in, the cart hasn't been refreshed. That's a little more clear. You could probably make a few more steps out of that. So let's get this bug list populated with some bugs we find in our application, because there are some, and some of them we know about. For example, we know that right now the removing from inventory, I don't think that works properly, or if it does, we don't have a way to add back into inventory, and there's a couple issues there. So, but leave that list of things you want done as far as bug fixes. It's okay? So there's 2 things to do. 1, application ideas and or adding things or changing things around on this phase 2 roadmap. Note the phase 2 roadmap is not done. It's just that's where I chose to stop. After that, we'll add things like Xamarin and web-based reporting and those kind of things. But let me know if you want things changed. And number 2 is find and document any bugs you find. Okay? So let's commit these changes to our repository. Or a stage of changes, yes. And I'm going to say added the phase 2 roadmap. We'll commit the stage. We'll go to the sync, and we're going to push these up because there is nothing to pull down. So there are no commits up on the server. Okay, so there is the latest source code. Like I said, Patreon members, go over to Patreon and get that. And next video, we're going to be taking advantage of .NET Core. That's going to happen either way. That's the next video in line, but let me know after that. Okay? Thanks for watching. As always, I am Tim Corey.